You're listening to UnitedWeStrike.com radio. Don't buy, don't comply. That's why. UnitedWeStrike.com radio.
Welcome back to our second United We Strike radio marathon of the year. We're currently joined by Andrew Johnson and Jane from the UK, myself, Rick Marriott. And we're now going to be covering chemtrails.
Well, thank you very much, Rick, and welcome everybody. Yes, we have a very interesting guest coming up now. That is Andrew Johnson. Hello, Andrew. Are you there?
I'm here. Yes.
Right. Well, we've had a talk about chemtrails on earlier on, but I'd like to find out from you how you actually first got involved in this.
Well, I'd sort of been following getting a broadband connection for my internet service. You know, I'd started exploring various issues that I was interested in, and I probably came across the issue of chemtrails originally probably something like 2004, and what really kicked me off to do further sort of research and try and write some letters and things like that was when I took this photograph from just, you know, next to where I'm standing now, of a sort of noughts and crosses grid of aircraft trails just before sunset, and it was the 10th of June 2005, and I sent this picture off to Coast to Coast, the popular US talk show, and they posted it on their website, and I got various messages from people saying, oh, you know, these are chemtrails, and quite a lot of people sent me pictures. But really seeing this grid of trails was really kind of sort of a wake-up call, really, because I couldn't really see how this could possibly be, just ordinary air traffic that was making this pattern. And I think, you know, the chemtrails overall is still a bit of a mystery, but that is probably the one thing which I still can't explain as to why we see these grids and various patterns that you see repeated, which don't seem to be consistent. I mean, I've got pictures with aircraft making a circle and things like that, and these are just, you don't see aircraft leaving circular trails, because when aircraft are stacked near an airport, they're below the height where they would leave a trail. So, you know, you're into all these sorts of questions. So that's really how it started. In 2005.
Well, when I see planes going over, I see some leaving trails that last just for maybe a minute or two, and then other ones leaving trails, the more persistent trails, that can be there for hours and hours. So they both appear to be commercial airlines that I'm seeing. So can you explain why some do and some don't?
Well, the simple answer to your question is no, I can't explain why some do and some don't. And from people that I've asked, nobody has come up with a sort of hard and fast explanation as to, you know, what happens in the situation that you described. For example, you know, we can obviously see that. We can see that some trails will disappear very quickly. We can see that some last for, as you say, for half an hour, what have you, and we can see them on satellite photographs, for example. So, but nobody that I've spoken to has come up with a list and said, well, that type of aircraft has a particular, you know, type of engine, which is more conducive because of the way that it, you know, works to having a persistent trail, or, you know, at that particular point in the sky, the air pressure is such that the condensation will last longer, you know, or any sort of environmental factors, for example. Nobody that I have spoken to, and in things that I've read, I've not seen a good explanation for that phenomenon. And I don't really know the answer to that question. What I have read, for example, is a paper by Ulrich Schumann, who was a professor at the Institute of Atmospheric Physics. Now, this came about because I wrote to the Department of Transport in the UK in 2007. You know, you can see all this on my website if you trawl through the various postings there. Or just go and search for Ulrich Schumann on the search thing on my website, checktheevidence.com. And you'll see there this paper. I think I might have even linked the paper itself If not, I can send a copy to people. I've got a copy of it there. And you read this 26-page paper, and it looks sort of quite scientifically, competent, and there's a load of page full of references at the end. But if you actually read through the paper itself, it doesn't really give a clear explanation as to why contrails would persist, and it talks about things like regions of ice supersaturation in the atmosphere, and this would cause cirrus cloud formation, and therefore when aircraft travel through this region it would enhance the cirrus cloud formation, and it's all sort of couched in these sort of terms, but it doesn't really give you any definite figures, and it doesn't say, well, we measured these environmental conditions and this trail lasted for half an hour, and then the next day we measured these environmental conditions and the aircraft trails lasted for 5 minutes or something. There is nothing like that in this report. And I actually wrote back to the Department of Transport, who referred me to this report as some explanation of contrails, and I did sort of did a critique of it. For example, there were no time-lapse studies in this report. You couldn't, what I've done and what other people have done, you can see these on YouTube, is where you get a webcam, point it at the sky, and then you set some software going to take a picture every 10 seconds or something, and then you load that into some other software and make it into a time-lapse video. And that can be quite revealing, actually. And I've got a video from Scott Stevens where he's done this, and I think it was in 2005. He shot this video near his house, and he basically got this, and I show this in the presentation that I give. You just have, open sky, blue sky, and you see a plane going across, and it's leaving, a short trail, and the trail disappears very quickly. And then you see this X pattern come across, which is two trails crossed over into an X, and you see that drift across the frame. And this is precisely the same day, precisely the same environmental conditions, because these two trails are in the sky at the same time as you were describing. And to me, there isn't an explanation for that. I don't have an explanation as to why that should be happening.
I know that Rick has got an app on his iPhone that he's able to actually point the phone at the plane going over and actually see the flight number and where the plane is coming from and going to. I believe that you also have a system that is doing that as well, Andrew.
That's correct. I'd heard about this iPhone app. I haven't got an iPhone, and I don't know anyone who's tried this out. I've heard about it, though. And I'm not sure how, whether you can just point it at the plane, because certainly in my experience, I've got something called an AirNav radar box, which is basically, you can get these off eBay, it's not like a special, it's just an off-the-shelf item, and they're expensive as well. I think I got cost, a few £100. And you basically, it's a little box about the size of a CD case, or a couple of CD cases stacked together, perhaps, the hard cases, and you plug it into an aerial which comes with it. It's about sort of 10 inches long, this aerial. I've got my aerial in the loft of my house and a wire running down into the room where I am now. And then you plug the aerial into this black box. You plug that box into a USB port on the computer. You install the disk that comes with it, and you basically get a simulation of an air traffic controller's display. And you can see all the aircraft within about 100-mile radius of where the aerial is, depending on whether you've got anything blocking the signal. I've picked up aircraft, even where I've got it, which isn't in an optimum place, from about 120 miles away. I think the maximum range is about 250 miles. But I'm not really bothered about the range, because I want to see the aircraft that are coming over me and what they're doing. And I set this going on a number of days in the last year, because the software, what it does is it picks up the signal from the box. It's called ADS-B. I forget what the acronym means. And it basically decodes the ADS-B signal, chucks it out the USB port, and then the software picks up the registration number of the aircraft from the ADS-B signal, and then it logs on to the internet, looks at a database with that registration number as a reference, and the database sends back the information such as the source and destination airports, the type of aircraft, the airline, etc. And the key thing is, of course, so it sends back the height and the speed of the aircraft too. Now, what I've found is that, and I've actually written some additional software to cope with this data, and I still haven't processed all of this because I've been so busy with lots of other things. But one of the key figures that came out of this was that only about 20% of the aircraft that come over actually broadcast their location. In other words, there are two bytes of information is sent, or maybe might be even 16 bytes for all I, but they give you the latitude and longitude of where the aircraft is, and so that can then be plotted on your simulated display. Only about, but the box will tell you which aircraft it's picked up, and it will tell you when they're not broadcasting their position, because it will pick up military planes, but the military planes don't broadcast their position. And I've actually, looked at the statistics for the number of aircraft that are picked up by the box, and only about 20% of the aircraft actually broadcast their position, and some of them just only broadcast their altitude. So you can, from that data, you know that there's an aircraft within 120 miles of you, and you know how high it is, but you don't know where it is. So already we've got the potential for some covert operation to be going on there, that even with this tracking device, which is reasonably sophisticated and it gives you a quite good quality set of data, that you don't get a signal from it, so you don't know where it is and you don't know what direction it's travelling in.
Well, it sounds very sophisticated to me. I've got the application on my iPhone, which is called Plane Finder, and I've been helping Cindy in America with a website which is called www.longislandskywatch.com, and I've posted some pictures that I've taken on a very chemtrailed day in sunny Bristol, or what would have otherwise been sunny. I would be quite interested to know how accurate the data is on the iPhone. I don't know how, if there might be some way we could coordinate. And whereabouts in the UK do you live?
I live just outside Derby. There are other applications that I can mention here as well, because this can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, so the audio just cut off there. I'm getting some cut off here, but that's okay. You can there's two websites that you can go onto. One is called, I think, flightradar24.com, and the other one is called FlightAware. That's in the States. There's one called FlightAware in the States, and there's another one called Radar Virtuel, which I think is spelled VIRTUEL.com. And these are basically have got Google Maps, which are in the background, and then you have the aircraft position that these things pick up, overlaid on the Google map. Now people can look at those if they want, and I know a couple of people have done that. But it's quite difficult, actually. It's more difficult than you would think to precisely locate the aircraft in the sky, and say, oh, that aircraft there is definitely that one on the screen. Because, they're going over quite quickly. You'll get them, going over in, 1 or 2 minutes. So you've got to sort of flip between the sky and the screen. And if there are two aircraft quite close together in the sky, maybe only one is shown on the radar display. It's the same with this box I have. You have the same problem.
I have the same problem with the app on the iPhone as well.
Yeah.
If there's a couple, it's a bit hard to distinguish between the two.
Exactly.
Is there anything, is there any data? I've noticed up until sort of about a week or so ago, every time I pointed my phone at a plane that was trailing, it always came back with, from the United States. It was always going to the United States or coming back from the United States. Up until sort of last week, then I was getting data that said the planes were coming from France and Italy and various places like that. Have you noticed that John F. Kennedy Airport always seems to come up on my phone? Have you noticed anything similar?
Well, I haven't been able to get all that many aircraft trailing that I've been able to identify. But one case I have identified, and I wrote off to the airline, is I've got an article about this on my website. I mentioned this when I spoke to Janie yesterday. I've got, in March last year, I identified 2 EasyJet aircraft, which were both UK domestic flights. I think one was going from Stansted to Edinburgh, and the other one was going from Luton to Glasgow, I think. And they were both A319-111 aircraft. They were both on the same day. One came over my house at about 25 past 4. The other one came over at, I think, 10 to 6 or something. So just over an hour apart, or an hour and a half or something. And one was leaving a big, long, huge, long trail down to the horizon, and the other one was leaving virtually no trail at all. So it does. From that, it does seem that civilian airlines are getting, they are leaving trails. So there's a number of possibilities as to what that is showing. One is that the trails are quite natural. In other words, there's no spraying going on. It's just ordinary air traffic going over the house. There's nothing untoward.
Standard contrails.
It's just standard contrails. But again, we're back to the same questions earlier on. No one will explain the difference. The airline wouldn't explain it. The Department of Transport previously wouldn't explain it. I haven't written to them specifically about this EasyJet incident, but so nobody will explain it. The other possibility is that we have an aircraft which looks like an EasyJet. It's broadcasting the signal of an EasyJet, but it isn't an EasyJet, and it is actually doing some type of covert spraying of some kind. So that's the other possibility. That's something we're going to have a hard time proving, basically, because we can't sort of go up there and look inside the aircraft or anything like that. Once it's gone over and out of sight, that's it. So that's one of the whole problems with this, that you're looking at something which is an inaccessible domain. It's up in the sky. We can't go up in the sky. We can't fly up there and get a sample of a chemtrail. All we've got is what comes down to the ground, if anything. And actually, linking what's come down to the ground with what's come out of the aircraft is perhaps more tricky than you might think. Some people say they've managed to find barium and aluminium in the water and things like this, but I'm sure that certain people would argue that that's, say they've got this in an aluminium pan that they're collecting it in, it's come out of the pan, it's not come out of the water. I know some people have collected it in jars and this sort of thing, but
it also be sort of fumes from cars and things like that as well.
Well, potentially, yeah. I mean, I don't think you would get aluminium compounds from cars, but you might. You might get some localized aluminium pollution. So there's a lot of hysteria surrounding chemtrails as well, which creates its own problems, I think. And a lot of people sort of saying, oh, well, it's all to do with HAARP, and just zapping everyone's brains by putting chemtrails in the sky and switching HAARP on, But this still doesn't answer all the questions. We're still, why do we see trails? I mean, like today, there was no trails. I've just been watching tonight, actually, just before we came on, and a few have been over. There were no trails that I noticed in the sky up until about 4 o'clock this afternoon, and then they appeared to start. And I know from the scanner that there are 4 or 5 planes in the sky over my house, pretty much, all through the day, and then the traffic does drop off at night. So why are we seeing such a disparity between these days of trails? I still can't explain it.
Well, there was some interesting research done by Cindy on the site that I was working on. Mm-hmm. She's found a powder contrail generator patent by the United States, which was filed July the 22nd, 1974.
Right.
Why would they? Any idea why they might need such a thing?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there are various patents like that, and I think that Rosalind Peterson has gathered a lot of those documents as well, and she sent me a lot of mine. I certainly haven't worked through all of them. It's very difficult to say from a patent. Just because something is patented doesn't mean to say it's in use. For something like a powder spray, they could claim it was if it was for a defence contract, they could claim it was for radar stealth. They put out chaff, as you know, to sort of confuse the radar systems and such. And I think they have much more sophisticated technology now. But radar chaff would be one example for that, for a powderised spray. I picked up an example from 2003. Where this was, I think it was in, where was it? Oklahoma or somewhere, or Ohio State in the USA. I've got the reference to the document somewhere. And what they were doing was they were doing an experiment to test how bio-warfare agents would be distributed. So what they did was they flew up a plane or two and chucked out some powder from the back of it, and then they measured how this was distributed over the land. And we've got similar documents from Portland Down, I think in the 50s or 60s, where people were, unknowingly sprayed with zinc cadmium, a zinc cadmium compound, and that's actually was released under Freedom of Information Act. So we do know that the military have done covert spraying projects before now. But whatever is described is simply not on the scale that we're seeing these trails, these days, and we've been seeing them, I think, since about 1997. I think when you go back and look at things.
One of the things, Andrew, is that we get a lot of whistleblowers from all areas, from the CIA, from within government, but if this has been done by commercial airlines, no one seems to be coming forward and saying, look, I'm the mechanic and I have been, adding something to the fuel or converting one of the planes. So there's no information actually coming from that side, is there?
Well, not exactly. I agree with you. There don't seem to be any whistleblowers, and this is another of the mysteries. But let's just mention one story that came out a few years ago. I don't know whether this is true. The guy is unnamed. There's a story floating around the internet, and somebody sent me this again recently, even though I first read it about 3 years ago, where there is a claim by some mechanic that he had to service an aircraft, and one guy was off for the day, and he had to go and service the sewage sort of pipes coming out of the toilet, which was, of course, the job that nobody wanted to do because of the smell and everything. And he said, when he got in there and he took the panels off, he discovered all these strange pipes, that he'd never seen before. And I think the upshot of this story was that these were meant to be pipes, carrying the chemtrailing fluid. I'm not sure if he explicitly stated that in this story. But this guy wasn't named. I don't believe the airline company was named, and I think, as I recall, there were very few details in which this story could be verified. And we've had a similar. I show a picture in a presentation where we see the inside of an aircraft, and it's got all these tanks in it. You can see it's got it looks ordinary seats, and then it's got all these tanks and these sort of racks of equipment in there. And people immediately said, "Oh, this is a chemtrailing plane." From inside, and that was the caption that was given. This was originally released on a website called Cloak and Dagger. And at first I thought, oh heck, this is a real whistleblower. But then after doing a bit more research over a couple of days, what this actually was a test flight, because these tanks were tanks of fluid, and the tanks are pumped round. Fluid is pumped between the different tanks in the aircraft to simulate the different loading, in the airframe. And I later discovered another picture of this from another Boeing test flight. I forget. I think it was in 2005 or 2011. I've got this page now, and you can see there's basically civilians in the aircraft walking around when it's landed, and you can see all the tanks and all these test equipment racks. And the guy tells this whole story of how they were on this test flight. I think I forget, it was some party of engineers that went on it or something for some sort of science expedition or something, and they flew on this test flight. So there's a lot of disinformation being circulated, in these sorts of areas. But other whistleblowers, I've not heard of one. Pilots should see this going on. In fact, there is another one, and this is another interesting story that people can look at because it happened last summer. There is a video which was copied by Tanker Enemy. There's a YouTube user called Tanker Enemy, he's got lots of videos about chemtrails, and he was sent this video, or one became posted, and it was by a user called USAF, obviously US Air Force, FE KC-10, and FE probably stands for front end, as in one of the pilots in the front end. And the KC-10 meant, the KC-10 is like one of I think it's a military version or a tanker version of the Boeing 737 or 457. It's one of the smaller Boeing aircraft, not the jumbos. And you could clearly see that he'd filmed from the cockpit another plane, only maybe 500 metres in front of him, something like that, very close up. And the plane, you could see, was leaving a trail, then it wasn't leaving a trail, then it was leaving a trail, and it wasn't leaving a trail. And he claimed that this spray was being switched on and off. And you hear the voice in the cockpit saying, "Oh, are you videoing this?" And he says, "Oh, yeah, I'm videoing it." He says, "Oh, you shouldn't be videoing it." He says, and you do realise that if we were under that spray, we'd be dead right now. And you can only just hear this in the voiceover. You can hear the engine noise in the cockpit. And people went wild over this video and say, oh, you know, this is somebody in the military blowing the whistle. And it was reposted and said, oh, this proves chemtrails are real and all of this. And I wasn't 100% convinced by this video. There's something that, you know, not quite right about it, which I couldn't place. And I wondered if what we were seeing is, when this trail was going on and off, and I've sort of seen this a bit myself over my house, I think there are two explanations for it. One is that it is indeed somebody, you know, literally flicking a switch and the spray is stopping and starting. And the other is you can just get to the altitude, because contrails will only form at a certain altitude. It's normally about, I think, above about 26 or 28,000 feet. So if your plane is actually at that altitude, you know, and it's just going above and below this region of the atmosphere where the air is cold enough to make a contrail form, you can imagine that this trail would appear to stop and start. Basically, I think that's what was happening in this video. That the plane was just at that altitude where the contrail was forming or not forming, and it was going through kind of a boundary layer or something in the atmosphere. So I wrote to the guy. I sent him a YouTube message on my YouTube account, and I asked him this question. I said, you know, is it that, or can you tell us any more? You know, what was your destination? Where were you travelling? What flight were you on? What was your mission? You know, when was the video taken? I asked him all these questions, not about 4 questions, I think, actually, maybe not as many as I've just said. And he never responded. He didn't bother to respond to me. And then about a couple of days after that, he deleted the video, and he posted a message saying, you know, I caught you all out, all you chemtrail believers. You know, I caught you out. This was a joke. And then you've got to ask yourself, if he really was a real military pilot, I would have thought that he would have been forbidden from filming from an aircraft like that. I don't think he would have been permitted to do that. So thereby, he would have been risking disciplinary action. Why would he do that? Just to take, you know, the mickey out of some you know, some supposed chemtrail believers, if you know that people are called that. I didn't really buy the story. It was all a bit strange, but there was no firm conclusion to that. You know, you can go and look that up, USAF FEKC10, and you'll find that the reposted of that video. It's quite an odd video.
Well, that was a very interesting story, Andrew. One of the things I've noticed over recent times is the terms like weather modification creeping into the vernacular. Have you any thoughts about this?
Well, I've suspected for a while that if chemtrails, I mean, the way I'm looking at chemtrails now is I think they're primarily to do with weather modification. A lot of people are talking about things like Morgellons, and they're talking about you know, things like Alzheimer's increase, and that's the aluminium coming in effect on the television the other day. You know, there was a new charity being set up for Alzheimer's or something, or they're saying that it kills more people than cancer and all this, and so people are linking it to that. But maybe, you know, maybe not. I'm still waiting for some more of the evidence. I think the interesting thing in that film that we mentioned yesterday, the What in the World Are They Spraying? That's got some interesting evidence regarding the compounds that they found in the snow at Mount Shasta. But I have another video clip which was quite interesting. How I ended up finding it. And I found this video clip about, probably about 3-4 years ago now. Now, I've got a friend who at the time was working for a company, and they were selling security cameras, you know, quite good quality ones, quite high resolution ones. And he was talking about his work, and he was sent me a link to the website, and it was a company called Mobotics, and they make what they're called IP cameras. In other words, that you can hook them onto a wireless network or onto a wired network, and then you can access them through a web browser, and you can see the live video stream over a web browser rather than it going through a sort of CCTV type thing. And on this website for this camera, there was a demonstration video, and I believe these cameras were made in Germany, and I think this video was actually shot at München Airport. It was either Frankfurt or München, I can't remember. But anyway, it was near the airport, and you could see this security camera filming, and it was a time-lapse shot, like I was saying before, over about a couple of hours. I think this shot was 2 or 3 hours. And why they put this clip on it was quite interesting because it showed the development of a thunderstorm. And, you see this sky there, very dark, and you see a couple of thunder flashes, not a big one, but you see a couple of thunder flashes, and then the sky gets very dark, and that's basically the end of the clip. But I noticed when I was watching this, crikey, but probably even several months after I originally watched it, that just before this thunderstorm got really heavy, there were 7 trails. 7 planes went over and left trails right over where the thunderstorm was. And then in the other, couple of hours around where this thunderstorm was filmed, you didn't see any planes at all. And, again, I used this in this presentation I've got. So it's a very, very interesting clip. Does it prove weather modification is, caused by chemtrails? I don't know, but when you watch it and you consider it, it does look quite suspicious. And going on to the other aspect about geoengineering, which seems to be entering the vocabulary now of the public more and more. As I mentioned to you yesterday, I went to this event in London. It was a free public event. I wasn't by invitation or anything. You could register on the website, and it was called Geoengineering Our Planet. Geoengineering Taking Control of Our Planet's Climate, and it was at the Royal Society in London, not far from Piccadilly Circus. And this was a 2-day event. I only went to the second day, about how we can mitigate the effects of anthropogenic global warming. In other words, the carbon dioxide nonsense which everyone talks about. And this whole conference was based around things like what they call solar radiation management, which is where we put stuff in the atmosphere to block out the rays of the sun, and how we can put various processes in place to reduce CO2 emissions, and there are all these wonderful models which were talked about, none of them which have much of a basis in reality as far as I could tell. But this whole idea of putting that as a public event and getting this idea of geoengineering is now starting to happen in the last sort of 18 months to 2 years. They had a conference in, I think it was San Diego, just about a year ago. That was the one that's in Michael Murphy's film with David Keith, the climatologist. He was, interestingly, David Keith was also at the one in the Royal Society, and I got the sense that he was like there as a kind of guiding, influence on the proceedings. It was quite strange to watch, actually. And I actually spoke up at that meeting, and I just said, well, I'm sorry, I don't believe that CO2 has anything to do with global warming and climate change. And if you look at the Hadley CRU scam as well, they essentially admitted that. They admitted that they've had to massage the data to make some of their models look look valid. And then, of course, you've got all these other factors, like all the planets in the solar system are changing. People don't look at this. There's been a huge storm on Saturn had erupted just before Christmas on about the 29th of December. We've had 3 red spots on Jupiter which have formed in the last few years and then disappeared again. We've had changes in the atmosphere of Venus, changes in the atmosphere of Uranus and Neptune. The temperature of Pluto, which is measured by a sort of special technique of occultation, that also appears to have undergone some type of warming process. So you've got all this data which contradicts, to me, categorically any notion that CO2 has anything to do with climate change here on Earth. And what they've done is, over the last few years, they've cleverly ridden this issue on the back of the environmental movement in terms of, I don't deny that the industrial processes that we use on a daily basis pollute the environment, and they do harm the environment, but that is not the same as saying that it makes the climate change. I think it's easily proved that must have a different cause, which is as much to do with changes in the sun or some other factors in the solar system than CO2. And we have, as obviously, the weather's been in the news again over the last few months, as we know, with the terrible flooding in Queensland, and we had all the floods in Pakistan a few months ago, which was the worst ever. We've had freak weather in California. We've had the bushfires in Western Australia. On and on, and there's the weather we had just before Christmas here, which was very, very cold for almost a month. But what people I think need to look into is some of the information about weather control, such as, for example, Wilhelm Reich in the 1950s and 60s and his cloudbusters, which takes you then into the orgone energy, which he did a lot of research into. He ended up dead in his prison cell, Wilhelm Reich did. I talk about that a little bit in the presentation, which I do. And then the thing which I try and advise people about, and nobody seems to have heard of this, and indeed I'd never heard of it until about February 2008, and that's the very strange movements of Hurricane Erin. And people haven't heard about this. Hurricane Erin actually was moving around the place around about September the 11th, 2001. In fact, what it actually did was it formed around the 1st of September. It travelled up towards Bermuda, travelling sort of northwest. It hit Bermuda on the 7th of September, did a bit of damage, and there's a CNN report about that that's archived if you want to go and check that out. And then CNN reported that it wasn't really an issue, it was going out to sea and there was nothing to worry about. But what Hurricane Erin actually did was it travelled for 4 days in a straight line towards, guess where, New York City. And on 9/11, about 8 o'clock in the morning, it reached its closest point to New York City. I might add you couldn't see it from New York City, at least not from the ground. I think you could just see some of the storm system if you were high up enough in the air. But of course we had those wonderful clear skies. The weather systems on 9/11, if you go and study them, were actually quite unusual. Hurricane Erin perhaps being the most unusual part. It made a right-hand turn on the 12th of September and moved off out towards Newfoundland. And Dr. Judy Wood, who discovered this hurricane, or discovered its coincidence with 9/11, published this information, I think in April 2008. And we've been talking about it ever since. But there's almost nobody else who talks about 9/11 will talk about Hurricane Erin. And from the data that Dr. Wood posted on her website, drjudywood.com, if you go and look at the other data, such as the barometric pressure, the temperature, the wind speed, for those which for those events of 9/11 when the towers were destroyed, it's rather peculiar because the barometric pressure was constant for almost 24 hours, the temperature was constant, the wind speed was almost constant in a constant direction right throughout the events of 9/11, almost as if somebody wanted the skies to be clear and they wanted the weather to be a certain way so that they could make sure the events unfolded in the way that they did. That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, you have a lot more information about 9/11 that's not really getting into the public domain as it should be. And it would be great if we can have you back on another show, Andrew, to talk about that, because we don't have enough time today on that one.
Right.
But talking about hurricanes, there has been a lot of talk about the fact that things with Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans was slightly suspicious. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, that's right. Again, if you go and look at the path of Katrina, I think, I haven't done a lot of study into this, or if I did do a bit, but it's a few years ago now, so my memory is a little bit sort of faded on it. But I believe the path that Katrina took was, again, quite unusual. It kind of like steered one way and then steered another, and then as it came onto land, I think it actually increased slightly in strength, which is kind of like contradictory to the theory of hurricanes, because the theory of hurricanes says that they derive their energy from the warm water, from the sort of tropical warm waters, and obviously when you starve the hurricane of its energy supply when it goes over land, it should start to diminish in strength. So that was an anomaly. I have a news clip from ABC News. And I'm sure it'll be on YouTube, where some residents of a certain part of New Orleans are saying that they actually heard explosions before the flooding, and they state quite clearly that the levees were actually physically blown up in one part of the city, so that the flooding would take place, and they were quite adamant about that. And then you've got the stories, for example, of FEMA going in there. And I know a couple of people had said that they tried to go in and help, offer help for the people that needed, pulling out of the homes or just support with actually recovering their lives or being rescued. And the volunteers were turned back. And then there was reports of radios being jammed as well, because there was a radio ham network, I think, set up by enthusiasts to try and relay information where the communication lines were down. And that network ended up being jammed somehow. I believe there were stories of that. So this is some very unusual sort of stories about that, which people can go and look at as well.
Yeah, that was very interesting, Andrew. One of the things is, what can we as ordinary people do about chemtrails? We are waiting for researchers to look at it, but what can we do as individuals?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I wrote to the Department of Transport a few years ago now, and engaged in a rather sort of fruitless set of correspondence. I mean, at least the guy responded to me. To be honest, there isn't a lot that you can do other than make yourself aware. To be honest, because wherever you go, you're always going to come up against the hidden hand, as I like to call it. At the top, there is somebody doing something with the climate. For example, Hurricane Aaron proves it to me beyond any doubt, and things like Hurricane Katrina, sort of add to that as well. But obviously, you can do the usual things. You could write to your MP if you want. I know, for example, that some MPs are aware of it. For example, Norman Baker, who's the Liberal Democrat MP for Lewes, or he was. I think he still is. And he's expressed grave doubts and concern about Dr. Kelly's murder and assassination. And he even did a public presentation on that at one of Ian Crane's conferences a year or two ago. There's another MP that I know up in near Lancaster area, that sort of way. I believe he's been sort of making a few muted noises, but I don't know what to do other than you can write to your MP. I think it would be good if people can get solid data. What I did earlier this year was this report. I wrote this report. People can download it from my website. Summarising why climate change is basically a scam, and it's a 40-page document. And after the Royal Society meeting that I went to, they were asking for submissions to this Solar Radiation Management Governance Initiative, the SRGMI, that's what it was called, and they set up a website. So they were asking people to submit what they thought, how solar radiation management should be done. And I basically wrote this report and said, no, you shouldn't be doing solar radiation management at all because it's not going to affect anything. And I put that onto Facebook and asked people to have a look at it, and if they agreed that we shouldn't be doing solar radiation management, then please could they send put their name on this petition essentially. And I sent that off to the Royal Society by the submission date, which I think was the 3rd of December last year, and I got 117 people to sign that. And essentially, I don't really expect anything to come of that, but I presume that we have some scientists actually looking at this Solar Radiation Management Governance Initiative. So, as far as I'm concerned now, they are on notice. They have been given the information. They have the government funding, or in fact, some cases it's not even government funding. One of the studies at the Royal Society was funded by Shell Oil, so that I found quite interesting. They have the funding to investigate this, and we should be, every opportunity trying to put them on notice. But the problem is, unless you give them some concrete information to work with, they're just going to blow you off and say, well, this is just contrails, I don't know what you're talking about, it's just a natural phenomenon. But what I would like to mention as well, in terms of if people that have trouble convincing, people like academics and stuff, but it is something other than a natural phenomenon of aircraft travel. I think you can clearly see that there is an agenda to normalise chemtrails in the media. And again, we spoke briefly last night of this thing that somebody sent to me. I wasn't the first to notice it, but I made a little video about it. There was somebody in the Godlike Productions forum who posted it in 2006, I think. And this proves to me, in fact, it was even admitted, that we have a scenario where advertisers are putting in chemtrails into their adverts. And the scenario of this was as follows, that Virgin Trains, they introduced a new train into their rolling stock called the Pendolino in 2005, and to commemorate this, they produced a commercial called "This is the New Age of the Train" or something. And what they did was they used a digital compositing technique, and they took some of the romantic scenes from black and white films that had been filmed on trains, and then they composited those into a scene shot on the new Pendolino train. And you had Cary Grant, and you had a scene from Some Like It Hot with Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis. And they were actually composited into the Virgin train. And then they also, as part of this, and I've got the video, we've got the commercial, it's on YouTube, I've got it on my website as well. You can just Google Virgin Trains and chemtrails, I think you'll probably get it from that, and the Railway Children. And they also use this shot from the Railway Children film, and this is how I was alerted to it, because somebody on my Facebook page wrote to me and said, "Oh, did you know, Andrew, there's a chemtrail shown in the 1970 Railway Children film?" I said, "No, I'm sure that's not right." So, fortunately, somebody has posted the whole Railway Children film from 1970 onto YouTube. So I went and checked the appropriate scene, and there was no chemtrail in it. And in the Virgin commercial, they'd composited this scene, and they'd slightly changed the angle of it. And you can see I've put these two pictures side by side on my website, and they've put a chemtrail in the top left-hand corner of the picture. So I'm thinking, well, this advert's supposed to be about trains. It's meant to romanticise things, this nice countryside scene with this train going through it. Why are you wanting to put something which is basically a form of pollution into this commercial? And the chap that I know, he was persistent enough to actually go, and he found out who made the advert. I forget the name of the company. I think it's on the website. And he found the advertising company, and he wrote to them. And we managed to track down a person who was involved in producing that commercial, because we're sort of 5 years after the event. And this person actually admitted that they did indeed deliberately put that in there in the commercial. They deliberately put this in. And you can see the letter of response that I got from Phil, the friend that I know. He got the response, and I put it into the article. And they basically admit they deliberately put this chemtrail in the commercial, and they claim that it was to make it look more contemporary, and bring it up to date and stuff, because they've got this city in the background of where the Railway Children shot is, which you can hardly see, actually. It is there, but you can hardly see it. So it was just totally weird. And then we've got other films going on the subliminal message. If you go into the film Over the Hedge, which is a children's film about some animals going around a neighbourhood trying to scavenge from garbage, I think. Within that's a completely CGI film. There's no live action, and it's all completely CGI. You see a few shots of the sky, and it's got chemtrails in the sky. It's completely computer generated. This is not an accident. And the Cars film's got them in as well. I've got those on my website. There was a page on rent.com which put a few of these together. We've had a few more of these in the last couple of years as well. The London Marathon poster last year, that had aircraft trails in it as well. In one of them you could see the aircraft, and the other one you couldn't. And somebody sent me that and it was all over the tube in London, everywhere in the tube in London. So, and then there's a cover of a book from Goodnight Mr. Tom book, which was written, I think, in the 50s or 60s. The cover of that book has a chemtrail grid on it. I noticed that when I was in Waterstones looking at books with my daughter a couple of years ago, one Christmas. So, they're putting this imagery out there and trying to persuade people it's normal. and it's not, basically, if you ask me.
Well, this might be a very good point to give everybody your website address, Andrew.
Okay, sure. Yes, if you just go to checktheevidence.com, and on the right-hand side, you'll find there's split into various sections that you can find things. There's quite a lot of stuff on there, so it can be a bit of a quagmire to work your way through. But there is a search, button on there, and you can do Google searches with, if you put check the evidence and then, chemtrails and railway children or something, that should find you that article straight on Google. Just use your regular sort of keyword idea, and you should be able to pick up most stuff if you're interested. I do distribute DVDs very cheaply as well. I've been giving out copies of the What in the World Are They Spraying film. I've got that, I'll give that out for basically about £1.10, including postage in the UK. And if people want more copies, it's 45p a copy, because that covers my copying costs and that. And there's loads of DVDs on there, health DVDs, cancer cover-up and all that sort of thing. So there's lots of stuff on there, lots of documents you can download, lots of audio you can download, MP3 that you can put on your iPod, and it's all free. Apart from, I'll send you the disc for free if you haven't got any money, but if you've got some money, they're cheap enough for you to get hold of, without any problems.
Well, that's great, Andrew. At United We Strike, we have an action plan, which is don't buy, don't comply, and ask why. And it's about taking one day out a month to actually look at things, educate ourselves, and to withdraw ourselves from the system. And one of the things that we're hoping groups and people will get involved in is using the day to possibly contact their representatives, their MPs, write letters, email, ring them up, so that they start wondering why suddenly they've got 10 or 20 or 100 phone calls or emails from their constituents about a certain subject. So I'm just wondering whether this might be an opportunity for people interested in highlighting chemtrails to actually contact their misrepresentatives. Plus, we do have I'm just going to get this in. We have a 3-day strike coming up in April, which is April the 15th to the 17th. And this is a great time that people can really get some action and inaction.
Absolutely, and I agree with that. And if people want, what they might want to send as a leaflet, I've got a chemtrails leaflet. It's just an A5 leaflet with just a few pictures on the stuff. That's something you could send. And as I say, this report, I've got a couple of reports which are longer, so you could that's the sort of thing you could maybe send to them, but either by email or by post.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. You've been a great interviewee. And as I say, we would love to have you back fairly soon, maybe on the 3-day marathon that we're having in April. And we'd like to hear your views about what happened at 9/11, or the possibilities of what happened. Because I think those of us in the truth movement, we know we have a feeling of uneasiness when we are fed a lie by the establishment, whether it's the media or the government. And sometimes people put information together, and it's like putting a jigsaw puzzle together, and you have the full picture, and it's almost like a feeling of relief. You let out a big sigh and that could be it. And sometimes information that doesn't quite fit in with the picture doesn't get looked at. And I think you have some very, very valuable information, which I think really needs bringing up to the fore, and just to let people look at it. They may want to dismiss it, but I think they really do need to look at this information.
Absolutely, yes, thanks for that, and that's absolutely true, and it's something the process that you described there was something I went through, and in 2006 I thought I knew what had happened on 9/11, and then I realised from information that was given to me in 2006 that there was a whole story which I wasn't aware of, and that ends up being much more important than the one that most people talk about.
Could I just mention 7/7 ripple effect, because that's the same thing.
Yeah. Yes, Anthony Hill's film 7/7 ripple effect, very interesting. And I've got a little snippet of information about that, because Anthony Hill is now in prison, the chap who made 7/7 ripple effect. And his trial in London was on the same day as Julian Assange's, which got all the publicity. Isn't
Well,
that strange?
Thank you, Andrew. We're going to have to wrap up this hour,
Okay.
and we're going for a break now. And thank you very much for coming on the show today.
UnitedWeStrike.com radio. Don't buy, don't comply. Ask why. UnitedWeStrike.com radio.